Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. This is a place where I talk about books. Before I tell you about the books that I finished recently, I'll just mention that I got a haircut this past week, and I went to a gardening with native plants workshop at the Swan Lake Christmas Hill Nature Sanctuary. I got some great shots of moss and lichens when I was walking through the sanctuary, so I will include those photos at the very end of this video. If you are members of the Moss and Lichen Appreciation Society, like I am, stay tuned for those. And in bookish adventure news, I had 3 book clubs in the past week. There was the YA book club, where we talked about Children of the Stone City by Beverly Naidoo, and the graphic novel Courage to Dream by Neil Schusterman, which I have talked about both of those in previous videos. Then there was my Lesbian Plus book club. We talked about Last Night in Nook by Corneliuson, a queer Greenlandic Inuit author, and I talked about that in my most recent video. And I actually learned since then that there are other titles in English. In the UK, it was published under the title Crimson, and it's also been published under the title Homo Sapiens, so maybe you've come across it in some other title. And then there was my feminist book club, and I haven't talked about that book yet. Our book pick was V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. This is a classic. It actually came out originally in 1982 and 83, book 1 and book 2. There are 3 books in here, and I think it was published altogether in 1989. It's a sort of 1984, the fascist dystopia novel by George Orwell. I learned that it was made into a movie. Maybe you've seen that. Anyway, this was my first experience reading it. I found it very engaging and definitely stands up through the course of time. The art is very stylish. That's David Lloyd's art. A noir kind of effect. I recommend this. I read another book set in the near future, also fascist dystopia. It's climate fiction, but this one just came out last year. It's called Deluge, and the author is Stephen Markley. I listened to the audiobook. It's really long, 41 hours long. The audiobook has got a full cast, I think 14 different narrators. And it's extremely well done. So it's set in the US. It starts out in 2025 and it carries through 14 years, following a few different characters. So it does jump around from different characters' points of view, and I wasn't so sure in the early part. Did I want to read about war crimes and a guy who was a drug addict and doing bad things? But I'm really glad that I stuck with it, because it is quite impressive. Now, I gave it 4.5 stars. I'll just mention the things that didn't work so well for me are that there were quite long passages that could have been nonfiction something written by Elizabeth Colbert about how humans can make a difference with climate change. And I also thought that the characters were archetypes, and I prefer more nuanced characterization. So, like, for example, there's a young woman who's kind of a heroine in this novel. Kate is her name, and she's described as a wild child, and even that her teeth are like fangs, and she doesn't let anybody tell her who she can have sex with. She's bisexual, non-monogamous. I like that aspect of her character, but for the author to use kind of wild animal descriptors for her doesn't sit quite right with me. That's all. So, some minor quibbles. I picked this up mostly because a frequent commenter on my channel, Jacqueline McMenamin, has said that this is her favorite book of 2023. And I can see why, Jacqueline. So thank you for mentioning it more than once. And also Sarah of Roadworthy has recommended it on her channel, and I will link her information down below. If you've read this, I'd like to know what you think about my quibbles with the writing. And as I said, I gave this 4.5 stars, so it is so impressive. And its sheer size also contributes to the impressive effect that it has. I think it's something like 892 pages in the print format. And that reminds me of another big book, a project that I'm going to be embarking on with my co-host Jolene of Bookworm Adventure Girl and a whole bunch of people who are reading along with us, A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. This is going to start on February 3rd. I am so hyped for tackling this big book. According to The Guardian, it was the longest book published in the English language when it came out. I can't remember what year that was, but I looked back to see what other big books that I've read, and Cecilia by Frances Burney stands out. But although that one was over 1,000 pages, it's not as much as A Suitable Boy. There's Kristin Lavransdatter, The Tale of Genji, Don Quixote. Now those are all translations, though, from other languages. And other long books, the Books of Jacob is not quite 1,000 pages. That's a translation, too. The Crimson Petal and the White by Michelle Faber. That came out in English, and it's somewhere between 900 and 1,000 pages. There's definitely something special about the amount of time that you spend in the world of a really long book. And for that alone, I think I will remember Deluge for a long time. And another audiobook that I listened to, a much, much shorter one, is called Eastbound by Maylis de Karangol. And it was translated to English from French by Jessica Moore. This one was only 2 hours and 20 minutes long. I listened to it twice all the way through. It's the story of two people on a Trans-Siberian train. One of them is a French woman in her 30s, and the other is a young Russian conscript. both of them want to escape. And we see how they come to each other's aid. It's a tender look at the inner lives of these two people. Kind of switches back and forth, not to first person, but to close third person. And then sometimes the narration is pulled back to, lines like, we don't know why they blah, 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 Very atmospheric, what it's like to be on a train, traveling across wild landscape with the forest, and just isolated villages. There's something pretty special about it. I was in the middle of listening to it when I happened to see it as a staff pick. And one day when I popped into Monroe's books, I just thought, right on, that's a good book to have face out there. And I definitely recommend Eastbound. Next up is another graphic novel, As I Enfold You in Petals. This is volume 2 in the Spirit of Denendeh series. It's written by Richard Van Camp. The art is by Scott Henderson with colors by Donovan Yashik. I recommend reading the first volume first before you get to this one, because there are some character development that it's helpful to see beforehand. These books are set in Fort Smith in the Northwest Territories. I can show you on a map where that is. The Denendeh territory is vast, and it pretty much covers Northwest Territories and part of Yukon and Alaska and British Columbia, the northern parts of British Columbia and Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even part of Manitoba. I'll put a little star where Fort Smith is located there. And Denendeh, by the way, translates as the Creator's Spirit flows through this land. And there are something like more than 40 different nations that make up the Denendeh and 5 separate language groups. And we see some of that diversity in the town of Fort Smith in these stories. The central character in here, Curtis, has just been through 6 weeks of sobriety. He's come back to Fort Smith after fighting forest fires, and he meets up with a powerful man in town who has made big efforts to turn his life around. And what Curtis wants is to step into his grandfather's shoes. His grandfather was a healer, and you can see the gorgeous flaps, French flaps in this. And there's his grandfather's cabin. And you can see people have left their crutches and canes behind because they've been healed. So the question is, can Curtis access that spiritual power that his grandfather had? And I love this 2-page spread in the middle where we see him singing a song he learned from his grandfather. So that's As I Enfold You in Petals. Richard Van Camp is a Tlicho writer from Fort Smith. He currently lives in Edmonton. He's lived there for about a decade. And he's published 27 books in the past 27 years, something like that. Very prolific and a wonderful, wonderful man. And his stories are full of inspiration and hope. And we definitely need more stories that are set in northern communities. like this one is. So yesterday I filmed a short little bit. I'm going to insert that here and then I'll come back. So I've got books that need to go back to the library today, and I have books to pick up on hold at the library, and I'm not up for filming a whole recent reads video. So I thought I'll just do the two that need to go back. So that's what you're getting right now, starting with this collection of poetry. The Berry Takes the Shape of the Bloom. It's by Andrea Bennett, who is a non-binary Canadian writer. They also wrote a memoir called Like a Boy But Not a Boy, and I recommend that one as well. In both that memoir and in this poetry collection, they talk about the experience of being pregnant and being a parent as a non-binary person. They also talk about their relationship to their body a lot, as well as other people. And I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from this to give you an idea of their style. The place where I get my hair cut is chock-a-block with young trans parents. It's not time to worry yet about how I'll ask not to be called Mom. First, Madame has appointments, ultrasounds, preventative health care for the at-risk postpartum period. No energy left over to say, I'm not her. And one last little piece. I'd like to have a body like a gun, long and narrow, smooth and cold and steel, able to hold gunpowder. Instead, I am soft, like a cushion. I would like to be as taut as a wall, my pulp as protected as a tooth's. And yet, my body insists. My body offers comfort, warmth, absorbs whatever an id has to spill. The berry takes the shape of the bloom, and Andrea Bennett actually did the embroidery that's used to decorate the cover of this book. It's embossed, so it sticks up a bit. I don't know if you can really tell there. It's lovely. The reason especially that I'm mentioning it is because the next book is all about fiber arts. It's called Sharp Notions, Essays from the Stitching Life, and it's a collection of essays. A whole bunch of different authors have contributed from a wide variety of backgrounds, mostly Canadian. There's Indigenous, Asian, Black, settler Canadians, and a few people from other parts of the world. And I love this collection. So thoughtful, so many different ways of looking at what fiber arts gives to us as practitioners. If you watch this channel, you know that I like to work with fibers myself. I knit, I sew, I quilt. I like to do natural dyes. There are lots of great illustrations in here. So I'm going to read a section from the introduction while I flip through and let you see some of the gorgeous photos inside. And I hope that piques your interest and makes you want to pick up this book. In the 21st century, we don't need to knit, embroider, weave, bead, make lace, or spin, but many of us do. Why? In our expedited consumerist culture, where everything is discounted and a mere click away, why weave a cloth for drying your dishes? Why knit a pair of socks? Why hand-piece a queen-size quilt? Non-practitioners may view these hobbies as illogical. The time they take, the cost and storage of materials, the learning curve, the patience required. But as you'll see from the essays in this collection, these minor annoyances rarely register with those who love fiber arts. For us, there are profound, beautiful, and sometimes heartbreaking answers to the question, why? You'll discover in these pieces how individual a writer's relationship to fiber arts can be, a distinct braiding of perspective, life experience, and practice. At the same time, some constants emerge. Practice as a lifeline, practice as contemplation, practice as a space to step into in order to make sense of life's most difficult challenges or greatest joys. We hope that after reading these essays, you'll be inspired by the many possible answers to the question, why fiber arts? And if you find yourself passing a yarn shop or fabric store or craft aisle, that you'll listen to that little voice inside you that says, why not? And that was Nancy Lee from the introduction to Sharp Notions, Essays from the Stitching Life. Okay, that's all I've got for you today. So thank you so very much for watching, you beautiful people. Please say hello to me in the comments down below, and I will see you next time. Stick around if you want to see a few photos of trees and moss. I'll put them in at the end here. Bye-bye for now.